Hi everyone, this is Zach Shire with Joseph Tree Service in Dublin, Ohio, and this is Modern Tree Nutrition Products, Part 2. First, I'd like to thank DCIA for putting all this on. It's really cool they do the recording sessions so you guys can get CEUs, and hope to see a lot of you guys at Expo. This is a lot to go over in 1 hour. Last year, went well, and part 2, I think I even have more information and hopefully streamlined. So I am making a handout this year. If for some reason you guys can't access the handout from the online version, just reach out to me via email and I'll get you the handout for some of the things I can't go or don't have more time to go in depth on. So anyways, let's get started. This is Modern Tree Nutrition Products. So my goal for you guys really here is to understand what influences urban tree nutrition better and why and how product selection matters. So this is a little bit of a misnomer from the title. It is not modern tree products as in the products that came out last year, 10 years ago. There isn't a lot of product types that are new. There are reformulations of products and everything, but a good example is humic substances have been here before humans even were on the earth. So there's not really anything new about them, but the way we select products and what is actually available to us is new. And that's the goal here, is to get everybody to understand that. So we're gonna go over what does a tree need, the root nutrient interactions, synthetics, organics, and testing and diagnostics. Now last year I kind of went over products individually. I will do that a little bit less this year, and I'm gonna try to go over product types. And hopefully that gets everybody to realize what these different products are doing, and then which brand you select isn't as important if you know how they actually operate. So what does a tree need, right? Now, all the BMPs and standards and anything you've ever read about plant healthcare typically say something similar as the basic needs of trees. There's gonna be water, air, sunlight. Now, I harped on this a lot last year, and this is becoming a more modern thing to think about, is the microbes. And I think as we have more and more information and research on microbes, we realize just how important microbes are. So I'm lumping them into the same category as the basic needs of a tree. Now, sure, I suppose you could lab grow a tree without microbes, but the fact that we are learning more and more about endophytes, the microbes within a tree, the microbes around the root hair, which is the rhizosphere, and the microbes in the soil that do so many other things, we really should be including them as just as important or necessary as water, air, sunlight, and soil. So when I think about what an urban tree needs, I try to go back and think about what a forest tree needs. So how does a forest tree get everything it needs? Well, obviously, it's generally through organic material, right? The leaves fall, the branches fall, animals die, trees fall over, and there's this huge complex of microbes that are breaking down all that organic matter. But in the age of using synthetic fertilizers, I think it's really important to distinguish the difference between how a forest works and how we have so many products that aren't identical to, and to be honest, can't really be fully identical to how a forest works. And this is where product selection really matters. So I made this graphic, and hopefully this helps explain it. Now this is very simplified, but we have organic material, right? And we have microbes. Now there are other players in here like insects and animals and worms and everything else, but we're gonna go straight to the microbe portion. So these microbes are breaking down organic material, and as they break them down to smaller and smaller and smaller pieces, they're heaving off inorganic nutrients. That's like inorganic nitrogen, inorganic phosphorus. These are inorganic, would be the similar to like what would come or be the end state of your synthetic fertilizer, because as we know, synthetic fertilizers aren't all inorganic, right? They get put into the soil and then they're modified by microbes as well. But what the plant root generally takes up are inorganic nutrients. So we think of organic material as heaving off some nutrients. We also are heaving off DOM, or dissolved organic matter. These are small compounds, so they're not nutrients. They are a collection of molecules that form compounds. They can be organic acids, amino acids, fatty acids, like things like lipids, phenolics, which are defense compounds, enzymes, hormones, right? So they're not individual nutrients, but they're also not huge chunks of anything. And it's dissolved organic matter because it can be soluble with the water. Now there's more than just dissolved organic matter, but for now I just want you to focus on there are nutrients that get heaved off, and there are organic compounds that get heaved off of that organic material. And then there's this process of humification. It's important to realize that humus and humification is a process that is done by microbes. So humus is not existent in the banana peel or the tree leaf, all right? It is broken down by microbes, and humus is made, it is created, all right? So mainly what we are getting off naturally from this organic material is nutrients and organic compounds, right? And then that humus is made. So let's take another look at this. So we have mineralization, that is the release of absorbable nutrients from the organic material. That's like nature's fertilizer, so to speak. It is nutrient based, right? Then there is humification. This is a process, a building process where microbes not only make humic substances, but they make humic substances within their bodies, and then when they die, those humic substances can be chemically formed, right? So it is a biochemical process. Humification does not happen in the tree leaves, and it is not existent already, it is made, right? Then we have this dissolved organic matter. Now there's also something called particulate organic matter, but that's not important. What's important is that this is not individual nutrients, and it's also not humus. They are small compounds that can interact with tree roots and microbes as themselves, meaning as that compound. So it's not getting broken down further into like a nitrogen or a hydrogen or a phosphorus. The compound is doing something itself. And specifically, it has a huge role in the rhizosphere. That is the small little ecosystem around the root hair, as well as with microbes. So all these little compounds you see here, all right, all these little compounds are interacting as the compound themselves with the microbes and the root hair. And it is an extremely important facet of organic matter, and it is overlooked pretty significantly, right? We think of organic matter as, oh, there's some carbon and there's some nutrients. But this dissolved organic matter and then later this humification is really what separates organic matter from fertilizer, all right? And it's really important to understand that and know that that is different, right? Now, all these small organic compounds, they are generally organic, so they are carbon-based. So they are feeding the microbes their carbon, and they can also feed the root carbon. If you guys are hearing this for the first time, you already know it. Trees can get carbon from other places than just the sunlight, right? The primary mode is sunlight, but that doesn't mean it can't get carbon from other sources, okay? And last year I called these compounds, these small organic compounds, non-nutritive compounds, right? So let's go over theirs. And I did have to laugh at myself because this is a Plant Food Co. label that says non-plant food ingredients. And I thought to myself, well, that's ridiculous. Some of these are plant foods. And so I said, I'll call it non-nutritive, which is kind of laughing at myself because if you think about it, non-nutritive and not plant food are basically the same exact thing. I just decided to change the name. So yeah, that's just me being dumb, right? So what are non-nutritive, non-plant food ingredients, right? They're compounds that have some form of positive effect on soils or plants outside of their nutrient content. That doesn't mean they can't supply nutrition. It means that they have some form of action outside of just simply being nutrients. And that's why they're so important, is they can help trees, roots, microbes, and the soil outside of the nutrition, because we still have the physical soil space and everything else. So what are some examples? Well, one, humic substances. So humus is built over time using microbes, soil, and humic substances. Now, humic acid and fulvic acids, they're not all the same. Right? This is a group of substances that can be different. And the humic substances in Florida will be different than the humic substances in Ohio, and even more defined than that, forest to forest and soil to soil, right? But most of their actionable what they do for the soil is pretty much the same. There's just differences in the details, right? What else are examples of non-nutritive compounds? Defense compounds like phenolics or tannins, or caffeine is actually a defense compound, right? We all love caffeine, but it's actually a defense compound. Enzymes, amino acids, hormones. Okay, so what's an example of this? What are you talking about, Zach? This is a molecule of fulvic acid in the middle, and these are minerals. Let's say, sodium or iron or whatever, and they are currently unabsorbable to the root. So for iron, that might be, or manganese, that might be Mn4+. So manganese 4+ is unabsorbable to the root. Fulvic acid can chelate, or grab on to that manganese and literally be absorbed into the root itself. Okay, so it can be a carrier. So where that iron or manganese would not normally be able to be absorbed unless it was in the right form, fulvic acid can do that for the root itself. And then that fulvic acid is now in the tree, and it's a carbon compound. It doesn't just sit there and relax. It is most likely absorbed and used as either a carbon source or as a root exudate, right? So this is just a cool little AI graphic. Shout outs to Adan from Vanderbilt. He helped, always trying to get me into AI, so I had to give him a shout out, and I'll give him a shout out later as well. But fulvic acid, this is just a 3D kind of mock-up. It's this big hologram looking molecule, and it can latch onto and hold onto something like an iron and then be absorbed directly into the root, right? Any of my guys, girls out there that go to the gym and have taken this amino acid, L-arginine, right? It was big in pre-workouts when I was in the Army. It's, you got to get the pump, got to get arginine, right? So arginine is an amino acid. What's interesting about arginine is there is good scientific evidence that shows that tree roots, or certain tree roots, can actually absorb arginine in its entirety, so in its full form, and it can store it as stored nitrogen. So let's think about this. We've always learned that trees need to take up inorganic nitrogen, but that is not true. Trees actually can take up organic nitrogen in the form of some of these compounds. Now, this isn't like, you don't put down organic nitrogen and magically the tree only needs organic nitrogen. It's more complex than that, but it can, and this is important, it can take up that. So some of these compounds can be more than just helpful action compounds that are helping something. They can actually be taken up as nutrition a little bit. And that isn't true with all of them, but this is true with something like arginine, which is pretty cool. So again, this is just really to describe how important some of these compounds can be, and you can get these from organic material, but you can also get them from products. So let's go back and kind of go over this again. We have organic material, right? We have microbes in soil, maybe not a lot, depending on how bad your soil is, but we have some. It starts breaking down the organic material. It starts heaving off inorganic nutrients and organic acids and compounds, right? This is that dissolved or particulate organic matter. So these are different. So when you put down mulch and it decomposes, you're getting more than just nutrients, right? And then the microbes make or become humic substances, right? And as this increases, the microbe population increases, the organic material decreases, and it keeps putting off all three of these. And then over time, humus is made, okay? So microbes are making humus, or are becoming, right? Because as all these microbes have these compounds inside of them, they're dying rapidly, and they actually get worked into that humus and that soil as carbon. And inside of them are some of these humic substances. So what's important about this graphic right here? You cannot buy humus, okay? There's no humus product, but the other three can be bought. We can apply inorganic nutrients, we can apply humic substances, and we can apply organic acids and compounds. That is important to understand. And I hope this helps alleviate some confusion maybe as to when or why you would want to use humic substances, and that is because they can participate in the micronutrient microbe root interchange, but they can also be utilized in the long run to form humus in the soil. Okay, so back to the question, what does a tree really need? Well, it needs this, which is a forest. Now this is a massive Costa Rican tree. Those buttress roots extended out, I don't know, 50 or 60 feet, and the tree's like 95 feet tall. I forget, of course, I didn't prepare and forget what the name of the tree is, but either way, that's a tree in a forest. That's what a tree really needs, but we can't give it that, right? Unfortunately, we do things like this, which is like, I'm not sure how successful this tree will ever be. At least the metal grate wasn't already cutting into the trunk. But we also do really other horrible things, like improper pruning, improper planting and nursery growth. We do things like leaving the cage on and not having we have a mulch mound here, but we don't have any mulch, just some grass clippings. And then we do things like this. And we wonder why our trees don't act or respond like a forest tree. And this is only some of the reasons why. We also have horrible soil, right? So what can we do about this? Well, we can't give it a forest, and we probably shouldn't do what we do on the right here, although it happens. But what about something in the middle? We can work with this, right? Or I think we can work with this. This is an 8-foot street strip with huge mature London plane and American sycamore. This is about 115-year-old city in Columbus-ish. This is along Neal Avenue for anybody from the Columbus area. So what is this important? I mean, now maybe some of these sycamores have tapped into the sewer system or whatever, but this soil has also been relatively undisturbed in those street strips for a long time. Okay, so that's an important factor here, is not disturbing or recuperating a lot of these soils. These trees were here before synthetic fertilizers were even commercially available. So if they were taken care of, they were probably taken care of with more organic things. Either way, we can work with this. Now, what I want everyone to take away with is to come to a situation like this and understand what they have available to them, and then, maybe not be an expert on how to use them exactly, because we can't cover all that in one day. But so let's get started with what are some of the different product types. We have synthetic and inorganic fertilizers, right? So we can mine or make synthetic fertilizers. So a lot of them are mined, but some of them are made. They can be bought as a single nutrient or as a combination, which is kind of an upside, right? But I want to go over the Haber-Bosch method. This is how they make nitrogen. This method was originally used to make explosives in World War I and into World War II, and then they realized that the Haber-Bosch method could be used to make nitrogen fertilizer. So regardless of your thoughts on the politics or corporation stuff on this stuff, we're just going to go over the simple facts, which is the Haber-Bosch method takes nitrogen and hydrogen out of the air. It combines it, and it puts it in a really, really hot 450 degrees Celsius press, and it puts a ton of pressure on it, about, I think it's like around 2,500 PSI, 200 atmospheres. All right, and out of that, you get liquid ammonia. With all of those inputs, the best return on investment for the liquid ammonia is roughly around the 15%. So you put all this, you put 1 ton of material in here, and you only get about 15% nitrogen out of it. So it's not exactly the most energy efficient, not only from the input of heat and pressure, but also from what you actually get out of it, okay? So it is really expensive and energy dependent to make nitrogen, and that's why maybe looking more towards organic options is important, right? So however, the options are pretty much endless. You can custom order synthetic fertilizers, which is pretty cool. Generally, you're gonna need like let's say if you get like an NPK mix, you'll need a pallet or more to kind of custom order. However, I have seen companies kind of work together if you're wanting a custom order and split the pallet or something like that. It can be fast or slow acting, and it generally is going to have higher quantities of the nutrients than you would get out of something that's like organic. And that can be good if you have a deficiency, but it can be bad if you're using it all the time, because we don't want too much nutrients in the soil because it throws off imbalanced stuff, right? So let's go over the nitrogens real quick. If you are using nitrogen on trees, you should pretty much be, as a priority, using something called ureaform or nitroform. This is the SRN, the slow release nitrogen that you're going to see on a lot of product labels. These are long chain nitrogen compounds, and they take microbes to slowly break them down. So they do release over 9 months or so. But there are other ones like urea. So urea by itself is different than ureaform. Ureaform is called ureaform because it's urea formaldehyde, or you might see it as urea triazone. That's the slow release nitrogen, but urea is relatively fast, ammonium sulfate and ammonium nitrate. These are anywhere between fast and medium release. Ammonium sulfate is used a lot if you have sulfur in your fertilizer mix because it's nitrogen and sulfur together. And then ammonium nitrate, right? So ammonium nitrate is used a lot with farmers. They use almost liquid ammonia sometimes too. So it's a whole nother thing. But if you're getting a fertilizer mix, I would really try to get as much of that mix into ureaform as possible so you get that longer breakdown. All the negative things I talk about in the next slide, sorry guys, they are reduced at least a little bit by ureaform because of the speed of release, right? So let's look at the downsides of fertilizers. In general, long-term use of synthetic fertilizers reduces soil health. This is, at this point, not really much of an argument. Now we can argue how much it reduces soil health, but continued and long-term use of synthetic nutrients pretty much reduces soil health across the board in some manner, right? So it's going to generally reduce soil aggregation. It's generally going to reduce or speed up organic matter decomposition, which can be a okay thing in some situations, but is usually a bad thing for the city because we don't normally have a lot. It messes with soil microbes. It doesn't necessarily reduce them, but it changes their composition, and we'll go over that. It can harm nitrogen fixation. So that is the pulling of nitrogen gas out of the atmosphere. It can harm nutrient availability, and it can harm pest protection, and that's insects and disease, and we'll kind of go over that. And again, the more degraded your soil is, the worse this generally is. And just so you don't think I got this out of thin air and it's just my opinion, this is just a short list of peer-reviewed academic papers that outline this. And this isn't 1970s fertilization practices. If you look at the date of a lot of these are 5, 7, 10, and 20-year studies that were published in the 2020s. So we're talking almost all of these studies or reviews are from the present time. So how does this happen? Why is this a problem? Well, one, you generally get increased decomposition. You also can get reduced stable organic matter. So humus, the stable carbon in the soil, can be broken apart, right? And once it's broken apart, it can be utilized quickly. Now in the short term, that's cool, right? More carbon. The problem is you start to reduce the stability of the carbon in the soil. You reduce your long-term bank of carbon. And in the city, where you have low organic matter, you need that bank to help. Okay, this is how soils end up becoming dead, is you use all your carbon in that soil, right? You generally get increased compaction through the reduction in the size of soil aggregates. You get a change in the bacterial composition. So the bacteria that are eating and consuming all of these synthetic fertilizers, their biomass goes crazy and all the other biomass starts to go down. For fungi, it's even harsher. You can reduce diversity and biomass. In fact, a lot of phosphorus fertilizers can be directly toxic at a certain level. So yeah, if you apply it one site out, you're killing a bunch of fungi, but you start repeatedly applying these phosphorus fertilizers and your available phosphorus climbs, and you're going to reduce biomass and sporulation of fungi. So, and you tend to reduce the stress tolerance of both the soil and the microbes. So repeated use of chemical fertilizers, it tends to make your soil less resilient, both in the soil and the microbe side. Pest, insect and disease. It generally will lower resistance to insect disease. And this is one thing where ureaform probably makes no difference, is because an increased growth response because of the excess nitrogen or the amount of nitrogen, right? So growth is favored over defense. And this comes from Dr. Dan Herms, Davy Research, R&D, and then also he used to be at Ohio State, before that Michigan State. 1992, he hypothesized grow versus defend. Okay, in 2002, 10 years later, he put out this paper, Effects of Fertilization on Insect Resistance. Okay, and then another 8 years later, him, Dr. Mike Rupp and Dr. Paula Shrewsbury put out The Ecology of Herbivorous Arthropods. So in other words, the ecology of harmful insects in the urban landscape. And this is the summary, point number 4. Fertilization almost always decreases tree resistance to herbivores, and it has the potential to increase their population. So fertilization has the potential to increase mite, scale, and adelgid populations. Hands, who's dealt with mites, scales, and adelgids? Probably all of us, right? So increased fertilizers tends to increase growth, and the tree tends to defend itself less because it thinks it's growing and needs to grow like this, okay? And it tends to increase pests. This is a problem, all right? This is where we'll get into secondary metabolites and carbon and why that's helpful. But first, this actually is a pretty new formulation. This is a sulfur formulation from Doggett called Nutrasol 90 Plus. This is a soluble tank mix micronized sulfur. Really kind of cool stuff. If you're trying to get sulfur in, you can mix this. It will be essentially a suspension, right? So it can go inside that water. It can stay in the water, and then you can pump it right out of your soil injectors. Pretty cool stuff. Awesome new way to use that, right? It's a micronized coated sulfur. It can be liquid injected, tank mixed. It's not hydrophobic like elemental sulfur would be. It is modified by soil microbes. However, sulfur is one of those interesting ones that doesn't seem to affect soil microbes the same way nitrogen or manganese or iron supplements will. And that is mainly because, 1, it is a macronutrient. 2, the sulfur cycle is very vast, and it is not dependent on specific air resources or anything like that. And you are putting down elemental sulfur. It just doesn't seem to have the evidence behind it that it is really now harming soil microbes. Now, that being said, don't go overboard. We don't need to try to change our pH by 2 percentage points or something like that. We don't need to change pH that much. But if you need sulfur, both in soil or foliar tests, or you want to help modify the pH maybe a little bit, then something like this could help. I also want to go over micronutrient only products. I didn't go over this last year, and I really wanted to this year. With having the kind of knowledge and backing science that maybe nitrogen isn't always everything we thought it would be, because nitrogen is made its way on crops, and trees are not crops. But we also are probably overusing nitrogen. We have this idea of possibly using micronutrient only. Now, you can soil apply these, but you can also foliar apply them, which I really like. And since they don't have nitrogen, you probably don't have to worry about burning foliage at certain times of the years, as long as you go easy on your rates. And we've done this quite a bit. We've actually purposely tested it in July in the middle of a drought to see if we would get any negative effect. This is on study trees, not, we don't do this on customers' trees. But there's so much evidence on micronutrients and trace minerals having a really profound effect on tree defense, on leaf development. We think of nitrogen as the limiting factor, but in the urban areas, at least in Ohio and most of the Midwest, micronutrients tend to be the issue, not nitrogen, phosphorus, or potassium, or maybe potassium. But so micronutrient and trace minerals can have a really profound effect on trees, and I think people should be looking more at this if you do have issues and you're leery about using nitrogen, and maybe a carbon product isn't getting you the results you want, right? So it does avoid the use of nitrogen, or at least make sure that your formulation doesn't have NPK in it. So maybe it's just a micronutrient or a micro plus trace mineral kind of thing. You can avoid the soil application as well, right? So, and if you think that applying micronutrients to the soil is not going to affect soil microbes, manganese is actually probably one of the most sensitive. But anytime you get into the metals, the heavy metals, so your zincs and your coppers and your borons, you can get sulfur or soil heavy metal toxicity rather quickly. Now, most products are going to have really low amounts, and I understand that. But if you test and you have a zinc deficiency and you just start applying zinc year after year after year, you are going to probably have some negative results from that in the soil. Now, you might still look pretty good in the tree, but again, as arborists, we need to be stewards of the trees and the soil. And so I did want to show you what it is possible. Now, I understand this may not be significant, but if you deal with pin oak chlorosis, I think that the results in this photo are pretty significant. Now, obviously you could do better, but this was sprayed once, and this was sprayed in July in the middle of a drought, and a month later I took this photo. So what you see is the leaves on the left are from one half of a pin oak, and the leaves on the right are from the other half. So this is 4 pin oaks. So the top ones are from the same tree, second, third, and fourth are all from the same trees. So what I did is I took a small little sprayer and I sprayed half of the tree, and then I sampled the average leaf from either side. So I sprayed this in July. We did not get any phototoxicity, and you can see, at least to my eyes, there's quite a difference there. So if you're trying to help a tree and you're trying to get more carbon or do a mulching or do this or that, and you just need some green up, you need some time, you need some help so that this tree doesn't die or start to have dieback, this was a pretty reasonable solution. And I think it's not harmful, at least generally speaking, and low dose. So yeah, just wanted to share that. All right, so potassium phosphite. Everybody needs to realize that potassium phosphite is not organic. It is a synthetic product, right? So it is technically a synthetic fertilizer or a synthetic fungicide, depending on the label you get, okay? However, it is very, very unique from the whole fertilizer standpoint that it does not act solely as a nutrient. It is a non-nutritive compound as well, right? In that it stimulates something called induced resistance. This is the immune system of the tree defense. Okay, it stimulates tree defense in trees. This is pretty well established. Really, really interesting mode of action here. And I don't think we know everything about potassium phosphite, and that's fine. I think we know that in general, mild applications are probably not going to harm trees. However, there is one thing that you need to maybe watch out for, is if you have severe phosphorus deficiencies that you're aware of, you may want to be careful soil applying a lot of this. Now, I talked to some researchers at Bartlett, and they had a really hard time mimicking phosphorus deficiencies using phosphites. So I don't think it's it's common, and I don't think it would be easy to do. But if you have a ton of phosphorus deficient soil, maybe bark spray this, or maybe take every other, you take some breaks here and there to make sure that you don't drive a phosphorus deficiency. It actually can directly suppress some pathogens, things like verticillium wilt or Phytophthora. It is labeled for that on the fungicides, that it can suppress them. I don't think eradication is the goal there, but trying to slow them down. And in our own practice, we have been relatively successful with that. I don't have time to go over all of that today, but it can help out with things like leaf development. Anything that's going to stimulate induced resistance or tree defense is generally going to help with things like leaf development or nutrient concentrations, retention of sugars, stuff like that. And then lastly, fertilizer versus fungicide. Reliant fungicide versus something like the dog fight or the polyphosphite. It's the same chemical, guys. So Reliant, I believe, has a little bit stronger concentration, but it's the same potassium phosphite, okay? So one is fertilizer labeled, one is fungicide labeled. Please abide by all your state regulations, but do with that information what you will. So we use one of the fertilizer labels. So that's enough synthetics. Let's get into organics. All right, so what is the difference? Organic products are carbon-based. That's what makes them organic. They have carbon-hydrogen bonds, and that makes them chemically organic. So they are more than just nutrients. Remember, we talked about this. Nutrients humic substances, dissolved organic matter, all these other compounds, these non-nutritive compounds that are not nutrients, but they're also not humic substances, okay? So we're gonna go over compost and mulch, biochar, humic substances, biostimulants, and microbe inoculants or biologicals. For compost and mulch, real quick. Properly made mulch rings rule the long term, guys. There's not really much you can do more for the long-term health of a tree than to make a good mulch ring. And we'll go over what good is here in a minute, because we all know, if you've been in the city, we see nothing that resembles good mulch rings, right? If we are making a massive mulch ring, we are essentially recreating the forest floor. However, mulch rings, are not as fast, to include compost, as some of the other stuff, but they are important. They both, compost and mulch, which they probably should be used together, they increase soil carbon, they increase humic substances, they increase nutrients, carbon, and microbes in the soil. They really are a really well-rounded thing. We really should, as arborists, be offering these services, as well as educating the public on how to do it themselves if they want to. We need to educate on proper mulch rings. So here's an example. You do not have to air spade to make a mulch ring. This tree was not air spaded. We cut the sod, we put down compost, biochar, mulch, and then we watered it. So all we did was simply install a mulch ring with soil amendments, and that's it. That was all we felt this tree needed for the time being. This is one of the largest green ash in Ohio. It's about a 50-inch diameter ash tree. This is in Dublin, Ohio. Houses were built around this tree in the 90s, and if you see, that root flare is not very good. So what do? We proposed to the city of Dublin to change that. Now, this tree was air spaded. As you can see, it's hard to tell the distance, but we took down about 12 inches of soil and turf built up around that root flare. What you don't see is the 6-foot-long, 2-inch girdling root that was growing up into that excess soil over the last 20 years. So we got rid of that, reduced the soil, and then put down a metric crap ton of soil amendments and a whole host of other things. This is a tree where we really, I shouldn't say kitchen sink, because everything we applied had a purpose, but something talking about organics is the combination of things. And it's not like fertilizers, where if you just start combining fertilizers, you could really cause problems. When you start combining organic products, as long as you're not necessarily being redundant, you can be very diverse with your inputs and not create a problem. In fact, sometimes you can be more synergistic. So for this tree, we cut the sod out, we air spaded it and decompacted it. We put down humates, we put down biochar, we put down leaf compost, we put down soil microbe inoculants. Then we mulched it and we watered it in with a fish-based biostimulant. So that may seem overboard, but every single one of those products is a different and diverse source of carbon, and we felt that was important for such a special tree. So you don't have to make huge mulch rings, guys. This was a pagoda tree that had no mulch ring. What's hard to see is right here is lawnmower damage. We simply put in a 6-foot mulch ring. This was maybe twice the cost of what we charge to do like a soil injected fertilizer, soil amendment stuff. So this is not excessively priced. This isn't 4 figures or anything like that. Now, this mulch ring will need increased in size later in life, but for now, just doing that can be huge, okay? So, compost. You should ask for an analysis when you get your compost, especially if you're buying it commercially that's bagged from somewhere huge. It's like, hey, what is up with this compost? Now, I will say that every year compost is probably changing, so you can't be perfect with it, but at least if they have a certificate of analysis, they're trying to do good. So we want to reduce heavy metal and pollutant input. Okay, different composts generally are all going to supply nutrients, carbon, and humic substances. So this is a paper, The Property of Humic Substances in Compost. They tested 7 different types of compost. 5 of them were all commercially available. 6 and 7 were trials or experiments. What you notice is compost 1 through 5 all has reasonable levels of total organic carbon, and they all have humic acid and fulvic acid concentrations. So they all have humic and fulvic substances. Compost number 4 is leaf compost. So that's what we use. It's relatively easy to get, very high humic and fulvic acid concentration. So yeah, just kind of wanted to throw that out there. A good, well-decomposed compost with an analysis. A lot of different kinds are going to supply different things, or this roughly the same stuff, okay? Compost and mulch is not always practical, though. I understand that. Generally, you're going to need to air spade it, or at least like incorporate it into the mulch ring somehow. So I get that, but we all need to be working towards this, okay? So let's move on to biochar. What is biochar? Generally any organic material that's been burned with little to no oxygen, which is called pyrolysis, right? It is very unique. Who here is confused about biochar? Okay, I'm here to tell you it is extremely unique. It's not snake oil, guys. There's 2 natural pure carbon forms in the world, diamonds and graphite. The closest thing to that is coal. All right, the closest thing to coal is charcoal. Biochar is fancy charcoal. It is the closest man-made thing we have to diamonds and graphite that interacts with the soil. It's extremely stable form of carbon. Okay, it pretty much can help any soil health metric or characteristic. That does not mean you can put down biochar and everything is hunky-dory and it's all magical. Okay, we have to know how to use biochar, and we have to understand that biochar is not magic. It is just natural science. And when you put biochar down, it is going to help improve your soil. That does not mean it's going to solve all your problems. Okay, so let's get that out of our head that we can just put some biochar down and everything's going to be great. No, it is a catalyst. All right, it is a home to soil carbon and nutrition. It helps everything, but it is not a miracle worker. Okay, so let's look at biochar real quick. I took some cool macro photos. What's that look like? It looks like tree rings, because that's what it is. That is pyrolyzed wood. Okay, and what you look like is like, well, what's the difference between that and actual wood? Well, 90% of that is pure carbon, and the other 10% is just a few of the leftover compounds that are left over. Everything else is gone. It all burned away. So what are you left with? This is like a macro photo of that same piece. You're left with this highly textured tree vessel system that's almost entirely pure carbon and is just this carbon sponge. And this is what it looks like on an electron microscope. So here's the pores and all the vessel structures of this wood that has been pyrolyzed and now is this rock of carbon with some other stuff in it that can basically interact with everything. Bacteria can live in these pores. Just like a pathogen fungi can move up the vessels and kill the tree, a mycorrhizal fungi can make it its new home. And this can interact with the soil and the nutrients and humus and everything. So it can interact with so much. So let's go over standards. The International Biochar Initiative created standards. I don't expect you guys to read this and understand everything. So what I did is I asked for one of these from Biochar Now. So Biochar Now is out west, and they are a huge producer of very good biochar. If you're looking for a company to buy some Biochar Now, Biochar Now does it, right? So what do we need to look at if we are looking at one of these analyses is ash percent and pH, heavy metals, total organic carbon, and hydrogen to carbon. So ash, right here, total ash, 2.1%. We really just want to look for low ash, okay? I would say something under that 5 to 10% number, okay? As your ash content goes up, your pH value will probably go up. So this biochar has a pH of 8.9. Most biochars are going to have alkaline pHs. However, if your ash content is low and you are combining it with other products, I would not fear about putting biochar in a alkaline soil. I use biochar. We use cubic yards a year in soils with pHs from everything from 7.2 to 8.2. And we don't see negative side effects. The reason being is you're not putting a ton of biochar in by volume, and you are the biochar is interacting so positively with microbes and nutrients that the possible negligence or the possible marginal change in pH is just not enough. Okay, pH is not the end-all be-all factor. All right, guys. Heavy metals, they're down here on the thing. You basically want very low or no heavy metals. A little bit is fine, but like zinc is technically a micronutrient, but you don't want a lot of zinc. All right, so you don't want a lot of heavy metal. So anyways, let's keep going because I got to get through some of this. I'm sorry, guys. It's just so much information. So what does a lot of the research tell us about how to use biochar? Generally made from woody materials. That's going to get you the best surface area, the best pore space and physical soil characteristic improvement. We want a relatively low ash content. Again, under 5% would be amazing. Under 10%, okay. Just maybe watch your pHs. Maybe try not to get biochar into the 10s and 11s of pH. You want to combine them with other products, guys. So composts, fertilizers, humates, organics, C20s, whatever it is. I mean, biochar does work really well with fertilizers, and that's fine. You can use those in there. Generally stick to around the 2 to 5% biochar by volume of amended soil. So if you're doing a big mulch ring and you're aerating it out, that could be a lot of biochar. That could be expensive. So if your client can't afford it, then just reduce your volume. Guys, this is not a pesticide. This is not a fertilizer. There is no perfect amount. Reduce it to meet the client or your needs, or increase it to also meet their needs. Now, I wouldn't go over 10% biochar by volume. There's just no need to, okay? And I know some people are gonna ask about liquids. All right, the amount of biochar in micronized liquids is generally gonna be a fraction of what you'd get for the big bulk stuff. So practically speaking, you're probably not going to be able to inject 5% biochar by volume. So we need to understand that micronized biochars are sort of a sacrifice, right? We gain practicality because we can pump them through our tanks, but we're kind of reducing the volume quite a bit. So I wouldn't be worried about how much biochar you're using with the liquids if it's in like a combo product. One that comes to mind is like American Biochar Company's Vital Blend, like they combine the products. You're probably never going to over apply biochar using a product like that because it's not going to be economically feasible to actually do that. So let's go over biostimulants. Biostimulants are essentially non-nutritive compounds, or they contain a lot of non-nutritive compounds. However, biostimulants is just the title for the group of products. So this can be humic substances, fish and protein-based hydrolysates or fish emulsions, seaweed extracts, amino acids, as well as microbes themselves, right? So examples, fulvic acid can chelate nutrients like iron and manganese and can be absorbed directly in the root. I kind of showed that before. An amino acid called glycine betaine can actually improve water retention in leaves, right? So it can battle drought. Kelp extracts contain a lot of cytokinins and hormones and enzymes that can stimulate root production, but they can also stimulate microbe production, all right? So humic substances, they can also chelate nutrients. They can also be directly absorbed. They can influence root and microbe function. However, humic substances are pretty unique because remember I said they're made. So the products you're buying are not made by humans. They're either extracted or they are mined from actual deposits of humic substances or humates, okay? These are very unique, all right? They can help build or the building blocks to humus. I would, if I were to call anything a soil conditioner, this is something I would group into that, okay? This is a print off of the nutrient analysis of a humate. So while humates themselves have humic, fulvic, and ulmic acids that are doing other things, this product also contains a bunch of micronutrients and trace minerals and macronutrients. So you actually are getting some nutrients with stuff like this. But yeah, so very much like soil conditioner type. Seaweed extracts, they contain naturally high levels of vitamins and hormones. So they tend to stimulate root growth. They help with cell wall absorption. They can also stimulate microbes a lot. They can also help chelate nutrients. So what you're seeing here, guys, is a lot of these things are doing a lot of the same things, and that's exactly right. A lot of these carbon-based compounds are doing the same things, but they're also doing other things that maybe are unique. All right. Cytokinins and hormones are not going to build soil the way humic substances can, but then there's all these other things that they are all kind of doing similar. So this is that glycine betaine. It's an amino acid, right? It can really help with drought or abiotic stress. So this is one of those induced resistance products. Salicylic acid, like in this green tea impulse, salicylic acid up here, that is also somewhat similar. These tend to be maybe a little bit more pointed at things like drought stress or just general stress. And they're probably going to be a little bit quicker, and they're probably not going to stay in the soil very long, but they're something really cool you can add. All right. They can generally protect the photosynthetic parts of the leaves. And I'm going to, I hate to rush, but I'm going to try and get through this because we only got about 10 more minutes. So let's get into biologicals. So what do I want to say about biologicals? If you are buying a microbe product, guys, you really have to watch things like the freshness of the product, the survivability, the shelf life, the repeatability of what these companies are doing and making. I mean, I would really hammer these companies to have them give you as much information as you can about their process. How do they make these microbes? How long are they storing them? Have they done testing? You know, how can they ensure that the product you're getting is actually not just dead crap that isn't going to do anything? Because then it's just a really expensive soil amendment, and it's not actually doing that. You also want the right microbes, right? These are living organisms. These are complex ecosystems, okay? So this is important. I've dealt with a lot of companies. I have not dealt with all companies, so please don't take this as a fact, but the two companies who have given me good information and have been forthright and open with me are two companies, Tineo Biologicals and Oath Soil Life. Oath Soil Life is actually one that we're doing a study with, and I presented on this last year, and I actually have results to go over. So they have dozens and dozens of synergistic microbe strains by function. So these are microbes that are categorized by function, and they work together. So they're not just random by themselves microbes. They've actually sequenced the genome of over 300 microbes and counting. So they're continuing to try to find better and more microbes. The product has a really high diversity and concentration. They've given me all types of research and information. They've been pretty much completely honest. I mean, obviously every company has a little bit to keep, behind the doors, but that's everyone, so that's not abnormal. These are studies they've done with universities on cypress trees, white pine trees, so actual trees. But here's our study. We're doing a controlled study on a condominium site. This site has an average pH of around 7.8 to 8. So very alkaline, very rocky subsoil crap. This is 10 red maple and 10 pin oak, so highly chlorotic species. We did sap and tissue analysis, sugar panel, soil nutrient analysis, and soil microbe PLFA, that is phospholipid fatty acid test. It's just a different way to measure microbes. It's really cool because it can also show you the health of the microbes there, not just the count. Regen Ag Lab did the PLFAs, and New Age Laboratories did everything else. These are third-party laboratories. Oath doesn't own any of these. We paid these labs for all this testing. And then here's just a snapshot of those pin oaks. So, 4 to 5 inch pin oaks, all chlorotic, but not dead. Obviously, we don't want to do a research trial on half dead trees. That doesn't give you good information. So these are chlorotic, some worse than others, but pin oak and bad soil. So some of the results we've gotten so far. This is the after result of the PLFA. So we tested once early and then once this year after, I think we've done 6 total treatments, which is the microbial biomass. So over here on the left is the total biomass on the treated trees increased almost 300% over the control. So that's pretty huge numbers, pretty impressive to me. But what's even crazier is we applied a product that is mostly bacterial strains, and of course, bacteria went up, but so did fungi. And what's even crazier is arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi are most notably associated with red maple. But in the oak soil, we saw increased arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, which is kind of wild. And then over here, I don't know if my screen is blocking it, but this is saprophytic. So we had an increase in fungi and bacteria, mainly fungi, that break down decomposing organic material. even though we didn't put any of that in there. So really, really cool stuff to see this and this is the only product we use, guys. So obviously we didn't want to add products and mess up the variability. So this is the only product that's been applied to these trees. So some of the nutrient testing and stuff, this is sugar fructose. So there's 3 sugars in trees. Trees take sunlight, they make their own energy and food. That food is sugar. There's glucose, sucrose, and fructose, okay? So fructose, the treated started less. This is pre-treatment. Then we start treating and we start to see these jumps in the treatment above the treated. All right, so this is fructose. This is glucose. Again, treated started below the control and then started going above. And I'm gonna overlay the glucose and fructose. That's the overlay. So the glucose and fructose sugar in the tree is, you see the same trend, is it was less than the control, and then we start seeing it push over the control. Really impressive to me, because how does a microbe product increase the amount of food in a tree? That's kind of cool. And this is what you're looking at when you're looking at things like carbon inputs, microbe inputs. These have unique effects on the tree that you're not necessarily going to see right away unless you test for it. So huge shout out to Dr. Amy Trowbridge of University of Wisconsin-Madison. I met her at a research workshop, and she does some really wild stuff. She does laser spectrometry on living things. So we did laser spectrometry to identify secondary metabolite traits in trees. So remember I talked about non-nutritive compounds and tree defense. Phenolics. So phenolic compounds are tree defense compounds. They are carbon-based tree defense compounds. So a drought comes along, a tree will make different types of compounds to protect itself. So we tested this in the leaves of these trees. So for all the oak trees, here's the data. This is the huge data. They ran all these tests 6 times on the laser spectrometry. So I promise it's not cherry-picked data. This is all the data. So they also did chemical phenolic testing, meaning they have a lab and they chemically tested for the phenolics, and then they also did laser spectrometry. So they use this fancy laser computer device system that can read all this with the leaves. It just shines a laser and comes up with this stuff. Don't ask me how it works, but there's the data. And then they also did chemical phenolic testing. Here's the chemical phenolic testing. Controlled, treated. The treated was about 11% higher than the control. That means the oak trees we treated were higher in defense compounds than the controls. By itself, that wasn't super impressive, but then we look at the spectrometry, and what did it say? 2 of the most significant differences, and I mean academically significant, which is huge, were non-structural compounds and phenolics. All right, non-structural compounds are secondary metabolites, non-nutritive compounds. The reason spectrometry does it separately is just the way they categorize it. I don't know exactly why the lab did total phenolics and then the spectrometry separated it. Either way, both compounds were significantly improved in the treated. So really, really cool stuff that we were able to apply microbes to oak trees in this setting. And these oak trees showed increased sugar and increased tree defense compounds. Really cool stuff. By the way, the years we have run this have been 2 years of drought, severe drought in Ohio. So I'm almost over. I'm just gonna keep going here. I'm gonna try and get through this testing and diagnostics. This is where the handout is gonna be really helpful if you want it. I can't go to, it's just its own presentation, so I'm going to try and give you guys a bunch on the handout. So as arborists, we need to use testing more. We need to use it more. I know it's confusing. It's confusing to me sometimes. We need to start doing more testing, and we need to learn and educate ourselves on how these tests can help us. So we all know about foliar nutrient analysis. In my book, this is one of the top ones to start with. We also have SAP, nutrient analysis. If a local lab or university does this, I also recommend it. Very similar to foliar. It's just the petioles and it's measuring the sap. It gives you a little bit more recent snapshot. And then if you want to do sugar panels, which is the glucose, fructose, sucrose, you need to do sap. So you can't really do the sugar panels from dry foliar. So you'd have to do sap nutrient plus the sugar panel. Soil nutrient, we all know about soil testing, but there's also soil microbe testing. There's roughly 3 different styles, and that will be in the handout, or email me. We also have sonic tomography or resistographs, drill resistographs. A tree is not worth treating if it's going to fall on the house. So let's be arborists first and foremost and diagnose trees. There's also something called chlorophyll fluorescence or a fluorometer. So a fluorometer measures the leaves' ability to photosynthesize, right? So it is a metric of the health of the chlorophyll in that leaf. It is not the same thing as a SPAD meter, which just simply measures chlorophyll. This is measuring the ability of the leaf to absorb light. It's a like 10 or 15 point sample test, and you can buy one of these. It's about the same cost as a resistograph. So just something we do have available. And then with an asterisk, light spectrometry, it's not really commercially available, but the technology is absolutely progressing, and this is going to be something that we can use in the future. All right, so refer the handout. Again, I didn't want to leave you guys without maybe a practical approach to this stuff, so I want to try to give you some take-home examples. So I'm going to go through this quick. So this is a tree. This tree has a huge trunk wound, but it's about a 4 or 5 inch sweet gum. All right, we know they are a little chlorotic in Ohio, and then they just put in this walking path. So we have construction damage, big open trunk wound, possibility of chlorosis, small planting strip. In my eyes, when I come up to this and I'm like, well, which one of these million products should I use? One of the first things on my mind is probably a root stimulant because of the construction. Now, if you're thinking TGR, I do not want to use TGR on a sweet gum, and I do not really want to use TGR with a massive open trunk wound. There's some good research coming out of Bartlett that's going to have some information on TGR for wounds, massive wounds, and I think we should probably try to avoid TGR with major wounds like this, at least at medium to high doses. But I'm thinking root stimulant, so one of the biostimulants or something like that that can really help, maybe like a cytogrow or a mitogrow or something along those lines. I kind of want to widen this mulch ring. This is too small of a mulch ring in my eyes. I want to widen this. So compost and mulch, get that mulch ring made right, check for any girdling roots. Next, these are street strip areas with crappy rocky soils. In fact, at the bottom of the photo, you can see all the rock. So I want to condition the soil. I need some permanent change. I'm thinking humic substances and or biochar, right? And then maybe we move on to soil and foliar testing, and then maybe apply synthetics as needed. Now, you don't have to do all this. If you don't have the budget, start from the top. Okay, this is kind of an order of priority in my eyes. This tree is not dying back. Okay, so it's not like we have to address some major deficiency immediately. If your client has $150, okay, then start there. If your client has $10,000, then do it all. But don't feel bad by doing a biostimulant, a mulch ring, and a humic substance. And don't feel bad by only doing one. Like, we need more carbon in the soil, and maybe we categorize those carbon supplements very specifically. Next one. We have not huge root zones right next to units. We have a weird, I think it's like a Miyabi maple or paperbark maple thing, and then a river birch, bunch of asphalt. First thing I'm thinking in my area, drought protectant. How can I keep these leaves from being scorched to death? All right, then I'm thinking some form of carbon, any form of carbon. They're tiny little root zones. There's rocks in one. We just need to get some carbon in this soil to help it. I'm thinking maybe humates plus something, or a good biostimulant, or a diverse biostimulant. Maybe TGR on the birch. If you use growth regulators, it's right next to the house. It's getting bigger. Maybe I want to slow it down a little bit. There's nothing wrong with that. Just go easy on your rates. Don't use a full rate on that tree because of that small root zone. And then maybe because I know that these are tiny little root zones, and maybe I've done some soil testing, I might put a little bit of synthetic fertilizer in there just to kind of help out a little bit, all right? Get a nice mix and do a 25% rate or something, that's reasonable. All right, another one. Huge green ash. That's that massive green ash. Obviously, we need to treat for emerald ash borer if it's in your area. They already were, but we're going to do that. My eyes, it was that big mulch ring with an air spade. We got to get some of this excess soil down. Carbon. A tree this large, it is healthy, it's doing well. We got to get carbon in this soil. Anything. Any way to get carbon. Microbes, humates, biochar, C20, compost. The tree is obviously adapted, but we need to preserve this tree, and it is going to need or does need our help. We just need to get some carbon in the soil. We need to help it out. And then big trees like this, we really need to foliar test and soil test. I mean, I would really recommend it. If someone has a 60-inch, 50-inch ash in their backyard, like, I tend to be a little aggressive with them and be like, guys, this is such a sentimental, huge tree. We got to do something. So I hope that helped give you some examples of like where to go with this. There's so many products. There is no right answer. There's no perfect answer. We need to focus on carbon, and we need to not blanket apply synthetics. Okay, guys? So I'm sorry I didn't have more time. Reach out to me. I take phone calls, emails, whatever. I want to help. Since you all think I didn't make it up out of my ass, this is all, oh, sorry, TCI, but these are all the references, academic papers I've used. And then this was a 10-year before after of an ash tree we've really helped in our area. So I just thought that was really cool to show a 10-year progression on something like that. Thank you guys. Thank you, TCIA. I really appreciate it. See y'all at Expo. If you're watching this after, reach out. I'm more than happy to help. Thanks, guys.